Paris, December 1940. The Nazis have occupied France for 6 months. A black American woman walks into a gathering of German officers at a private chateau. She's wearing an elegant evening gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. The Germans know exactly who she is: Josephine Baker, the most famous entertainer in Europe. The woman who'd scandalized and captivated Paris in the 1920s with her performances at the Folies Bergère. The officers are delighted to have her at their party. They chat with her between champagne toasts. They talk freely around her, discussing troop movements, supply problems, defensive positions. They assume she's apolitical, just an entertainer, grateful to perform for whoever's in power. They assume a black American woman is too frivolous, too uneducated, too focused on her career to care about politics or war. They assume she's not a spy. They're wrong on every count. Josephine Baker is a French resistance operative working for the WWII Bureau, French military intelligence. Every conversation she's having tonight is being memorized. Every detail the Germans casually mention will be written in invisible ink on her sheet music and smuggled to free French forces. Every assumption the Nazis make about her is a weapon she's using against them. She smiles, laughs at their jokes, accepts their compliments, and she remembers everything. Subscribe to see how Josephine Baker used Nazi racism as cover for espionage that helped win the war. This is Josephine Baker's secret war. The Nazis saw a performer. The French resistance saw an intelligence operative who could go places no white agent ever could. And Baker herself saw a chance to fight fascism using the one thing the Nazis never expected: a black woman who was smarter than they assumed. To understand why Josephine Baker became such an effective spy, you need to understand who she was before the war and why the Germans completely underestimated her. Born Frida Josephine McDonald in St. Louis, Missouri in 1906, Baker grew up in poverty and segregation. She left home as a teenager to perform in vaudeville shows, eventually making her way to New York and the Harlem Renaissance scene. But America in the 1920s offered limited opportunities for black performers. Segregation meant black entertainers played to black audiences in black venues. In 1925, Baker left for Paris. And Paris changed everything. France in the 1920s was experiencing a fascination with black American culture: jazz, dance, art. Baker became a sensation almost immediately. Her performances at the Folies Bergère and later the Casino de Paris were legendary. By the late 1920s, she was the highest-paid entertainer in Europe. But Baker wasn't just a performer. She was intelligent, politically aware, and deeply grateful to France for giving her opportunities America had denied. When France granted her citizenship in 1937, she took it seriously. She'd found a home that treated her as a person, not just as colored help. When war came in 1939, Baker volunteered immediately. She offered herself to the WWII Bureau, French military intelligence. Her offer was initially dismissed. Spies were supposed to be invisible, unremarkable, able to blend in. Josephine Baker was the opposite, the most recognizable woman in France. But Jacques Abté, an intelligence officer in the WWII Bureau, saw what others missed. Baker's fame wasn't a liability. It was the perfect cover. Think about it from an intelligence perspective. A spy needs access to targets, reasons to travel, ability to gather information without suspicion. Baker had all of that. Her fame gave her access to high society gatherings where German officers and Vichy collaborators met. As an entertainer, she was expected to be charming and social. People talked freely around her because entertainers weren't supposed to be political. Her career gave her reasons to travel. Concert tours across Europe and North Africa were natural. Border guards and customs officials wouldn't question why Josephine Baker was crossing borders. She was performing. Most importantly, Nazi racial ideology worked in her favor. The Nazis believed black people were intellectually inferior, incapable of complex thought or strategic planning. They saw Baker as an entertainer, a performer, someone who sang and danced but couldn't possibly understand politics or military strategy. This racist assumption made her invisible as a threat. German officers would discuss sensitive information in her presence because they assumed she was too frivolous, too uneducated to understand or care about military intelligence. They were spectacularly wrong. Baker spoke fluent French, German, and English. She was highly intelligent and politically sophisticated. She understood exactly what the Nazis represented, and she was willing to risk everything to fight them. Abti recruited her formally in September 1939, just after war was declared. He became her handler, traveling with her under the cover of being her assistant. Their partnership would last throughout the war. Baker's first assignment was simple: attend parties, socialize with German officers and Vichy officials, listen to what they said, and report back. The intelligence she gathered, troop movements, supply problems, morale issues, defensive positions, was written in invisible ink on her sheet music. She carried that sheet music across borders constantly. Who would suspect that Josephine Baker's musical scores contained military intelligence? Customs officials saw an entertainer traveling with her music. They didn't see a spy carrying secrets. The invisible ink was developed by resistance chemists. When exposed to specific chemicals, the notes on the margins of her sheet music revealed intelligence reports. Baker would perform concerts across France and North Africa, and her sheet music, covered in invisible messages, would travel with her unchallenged. This method was brilliant, precisely because it was so obvious. Baker was famous for her music. Of course, she carried sheet music. The Germans never suspected those scores contained anything but musical notation. By early 1940, Baker was providing regular intelligence to the WWII Bureau. She attended parties in Paris where German officers spoke freely. She performed at gatherings where Vichy collaborators discussed their dealings with the occupiers. She heard things no other French agent could access because no other agent could move in those circles without suspicion. And she did all of this while maintaining her career, continuing to perform, acting like nothing had changed. The Germans saw what they expected to see: a Black American entertainer who was apolitical and grateful for opportunities to perform. They never saw the spy who was systematically collecting intelligence on their occupation. By late 1940, France had been divided. Northern France, including Paris, was under direct German occupation. Southern France was nominally independent under the Vichy government, but Vichy collaborated closely with the Nazis. Baker had to leave Paris. As the occupation solidified, staying in the capital became too dangerous. But leaving Paris didn't mean leaving intelligence work, it meant expanding it. She moved to her chateau in the Dordogne region of southern France, Les Milandes. The chateau became a safe house for resistance members. Baker hosted people fleeing the Nazis, helped Jews escape, and provided cover for resistance operatives. But her most important work continued to be intelligence gathering, and for that, she needed to travel. In 1940 to 1941, Baker undertook a concert tour across France, Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. Officially, she was performing. Actually, she was gathering intelligence and smuggling information. The concert tour was cover for multiple intelligence operations. In each city, Baker would perform for mixed audiences: German officers, Vichy officials, local elites, and ordinary citizens. After performances, she'd attend parties and receptions where the powerful gathered. German officers and Vichy collaborators wanted to meet the famous Josephine Baker. They invited her to social events, dined with her, showed her around military facilities, and talked freely in her presence. They told her about troop dispositions. They complained about supply shortages. They discussed defensive fortifications. They gossiped about command conflicts. They revealed information that trained intelligence officers would have killed to obtain. And Baker wrote it all down, in invisible ink on her sheet music. Jacques Abté, traveling as her assistant, would help encode the intelligence. They used invisible ink formulas provided by French intelligence. The ink was colorless when applied, but would reveal text when treated with specific chemicals known to Allied intelligence services. Baker's method was systematic. During or immediately after gatherings, she'd excuse herself and write notes in regular ink about the event. Names, dates, general topics discussed. This served as her cover if Germans searched her belongings. Just an entertainer keeping a diary. Then later, in private, she'd write the actual intelligence in invisible ink on the margins of her sheet music. Troop numbers, locations, fortification details, supply routes, everything the Germans had carelessly mentioned in her presence. The sheet music would then travel with her to her next performance. When she reached locations where Free French intelligence had contacts, the music would be accidentally left behind, or given as a gift to local musicians who were actually resistance contacts. The music would make its way to Free French intelligence in London or North Africa, where chemists would reveal the hidden messages. Baker's intelligence helped Allied forces understand German defenses, plan operations, and track Nazi movements. One particularly valuable piece of intelligence came from a gathering in Portugal in 1941. A German officer, trying to impress Baker, mentioned that Wehrmacht forces were struggling with fuel shortages along the Atlantic coast because fuel was being diverted to prepare for operations in Eastern Europe. Baker reported this. The intelligence helped confirm Allied suspicions that Germany was planning to invade the Soviet Union. When Operation Barbarossa launched in June 1941, Allied intelligence wasn't surprised. The concert tour also allowed Baker to help people escape. Jews fleeing persecution, resistance members fleeing arrest, Allied pilots shot down over France. Baker helped smuggle many of them to safety. She'd provide people with papers, let them pose as members of her entourage, and smuggle them across borders. Border guards who inspected Josephine Baker's traveling party saw what they expected: an entertainer with assistants, musicians, and staff. They didn't look closely at who those people actually were. One documented case involved a Jewish family fleeing Paris. Baker provided them with papers identifying them as her technical crew. They traveled with her from France to Portugal, crossing multiple borders. Guards saw Josephine Baker's tour group and waved them through. The family reached Portugal and eventually escaped to the United States. Baker also smuggled photographs. French resistance members provided her with photos of German military installations, fortifications, and equipment. She'd pin the photos inside her clothing. Who would search Josephine Baker? The photographs made their way to Allied intelligence, providing visual confirmation of German defensive positions. Some of these photos were used to plan Allied operations, including preparation for the eventual invasion of France in 1944. Throughout 1941, Baker continued this work. Performance, gather intelligence, write it in invisible ink, smuggle it across borders, help people escape. The routine was exhausting and dangerous. Discovery would mean arrest, interrogation, and likely execution. But Baker never wavered. France had given her opportunities America denied. France had treated her as a person when America treated her as second class. She would risk everything to defend her adopted country. In late 1941, Baker extended her concert tour to North Africa. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, French colonies where Vichy control was strong, but where Free French intelligence also operated. North Africa was strategically crucial. The Allies needed intelligence on German and Italian forces in the region. Baker's fame gave her access to all of it. She performed in Casablanca, Algiers, Tunis. German officers stationed in North Africa, Italian officers from nearby Libya, Vichy military commanders, all attended her performances. All wanted to meet her afterward, and all talked freely around her. One particularly valuable intelligence operation occurred in Morocco. Baker was invited to tour military installations by Vichy officers who wanted to impress her. They showed her airfields, thinking she'd be amazed by the military might. She memorized aircraft numbers, types, deployment patterns. She observed fuel storage, ammunition depots, defensive positions. Everything she saw was written in invisible ink on her sheet music and smuggled to free French contacts in North Africa. This intelligence helped Allied planners prepare for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. But North Africa also brought personal cost. In 1941, Baker became seriously ill, possibly a gynecological infection that developed into septicemia. She was hospitalized in Casablanca for months, so ill that rumors spread in Europe that she'd died. Baker came close to death multiple times. She underwent multiple surgeries. She was bedridden for over a year. But even while recovering, she continued intelligence work. Her hospital room became a meeting place for free French operatives. Under the cover of visiting the famous entertainer, resistance members would come to her room to exchange information and coordinate operations. By late 1942, Baker had recovered enough to resume limited activities. North Africa had fallen to the Allies after Operation Torch. The tide of war was shifting. Baker joined the Free French Forces officially. She was commissioned as a sub-lieutenant in the Women's Auxiliary of the French Air Force. She performed for Allied troops across North Africa and the Middle East, concerts that boosted troop morale while maintaining her cover. The Free French awarded her the Croix de Guerre for her intelligence work. After the war, she would receive the Médaille de la Résistance avec Rosette and be made a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur. But during the war, her decorations remained secret. Revealing them would have exposed her espionage activities. After the war ended in 1945, Josephine Baker returned to France as a hero. But her espionage work remained largely secret for years. French intelligence didn't immediately reveal the full extent of her activities. Those details emerged gradually over decades. Jacques Abté wrote a book after the war, La Guerre Secrète de Josephine Baker, that revealed many details of their intelligence operations. The book confirmed what some had suspected. Baker hadn't just been a patriotic entertainer. She'd been an active intelligence operative conducting espionage operations under deep cover. The French government recognized her service with significant honors. The Croix de Guerre with Palme, the Médaille de la Résistance avec Rosette, and Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur, later elevated to Commandeur. But recognition was complicated by the secrecy surrounding intelligence work and by prejudice. Some French officials were more comfortable recognizing Baker as an entertainer who'd supported the troops than as a spy who'd gathered crucial intelligence. After the war, Baker continued performing but also became a civil rights activist. Her wartime experience fighting fascism informed her post-war fight against racism. She refused to perform for segregated audiences in the United States. She participated in the March on Washington in 1963. She adopted 12 children from different ethnic and religious backgrounds. She called them her Rainbow Tribe, and raised them at Les Milandes as a demonstration that people of all races could live together harmoniously. Baker died in 1975 in Paris. Her funeral was attended by thousands. She received full French military honors, one of the few women to receive such recognition. In 2021, Baker was inducted into the French Pantheon, the highest honor France can bestow. She became the first black woman to receive this recognition. The ceremony acknowledged all aspects of her life: performer, resistance fighter, civil rights activist. The induction specifically mentioned her espionage work. The French government officially recognized that Josephine Baker had been a spy, that her intelligence work had contributed to Allied victory, and that her service deserved the highest national honor. Josephine Baker's espionage career demonstrates that effective cover is crucial. Her fame wasn't a liability, it was her greatest asset. She could access places and people that traditional spies couldn't reach. The Nazis' racism blinded them to Baker's capabilities. They saw a black entertainer and assumed she was politically naive and intellectually limited. Their prejudice prevented them from recognizing a sophisticated intelligence operative. Baker didn't use dead drops, coded radio transmissions, or covert photography in the traditional sense. She used invisible ink on sheet music, smuggled people by including them in her entourage, and hid photographs in her clothing. Her methods matched her cover and capabilities. The Nazis never suspected Josephine Baker was a spy because they couldn't imagine that a black female entertainer could be intelligent, politically aware, and strategically valuable. Every racist assumption they made created blind spots she exploited. Those blind spots cost them. Intelligence Baker gathered helped the Allies understand German dispositions, plan operations, and ultimately defeat Nazi forces. She walked into rooms full of German officers, charmed them, listened to them, and reported everything they said. She carried military intelligence across borders in her sheet music while customs officials smiled and waved her through. She smuggled people to safety by hiding them in plain sight as members of her famous entourage. She did all of this because the Nazis assumed she couldn't, and their assumption was her advantage. Josephine Baker was a performer who entertained millions. She was a civil rights activist who fought segregation, and she was a spy who helped defeat Nazi Germany by being exactly what her enemies assumed she couldn't be: intelligent, strategic, and dangerous. The Nazis thought they were meeting a famous entertainer. They were meeting French intelligence's most effective agent. She remembered everything. She wrote it in invisible ink. She smuggled it across borders, and she helped win a war. The black female spy who infiltrated a Nazi network in France wasn't hiding in shadows. She was on stage, in the spotlight, exactly where everyone could see her. And because everyone could see her, no one saw her for what she really was. That's genius-level spycraft. That's Josephine Baker's secret war.